At 7:12 on a cold Tuesday morning, Ethan Walker stepped onto his porch and saw his silver pickup already halfway onto a tow truck. HOA President Karen Whitmore stood beside the curb with a violation folder pressed against her coat, calmly telling the driver that commercial vehicles were prohibited. Ethan did not shout. He raised his phone and asked, "Who authorized you to remove a vehicle from this parcel?" Karen answered for the driver. "The HOA controls this entire road." 20 minutes later, at the tow yard, the manager opened a county parcel map, looked at Ethan, and frowned. "Wait, who actually owns this road?" Ethan placed a recorded deed on the desk. "I do. If stories about ordinary people standing up to quiet abuses of power are why you are here, subscribe and tell us where you are watching from, because this one started with a pickup truck and ended with a question an entire board wished Karen had asked before she signed anything." 3 weeks earlier, nothing about Ethan Walker's mornings suggested that his driveway would become the center of a neighborhood fight. He was 47, lived alone in the same one-story house his father had spent decades maintaining, and kept his life simple enough that most of his neighbors knew him only as the man who waved from the mailbox and fixed his own fences. His property sat near the western edge of a planned subdivision called Cedar Ridge Estates, where matching stone entrance signs, trimmed medians, and freshly painted mailbox posts announced that the community took rules seriously. Ethan's land was older than all of it. His father had bought the acreage when the area was still pasture, scrub oak, and a narrow county access lane. Years later, when a developer turned the neighboring tract into Cedar Ridge, that lane became a paved road connecting 38 homes to the county highway. The asphalt looked continuous. The street signs looked official. The HOA paid to patch potholes on part of it. To anyone driving through, the entire road appeared to belong to the subdivision. Ethan knew better, though he rarely had a reason to say so. His driveway joined the road at a shallow angle, just past a drainage ditch and an old galvanized mailbox. Near the edge of the grass, half hidden by clover, sat a rust-stained metal survey pin his father had told him never to disturb. "That little piece of steel has outlived 3 fences and 2 arguments," his father once said. Ethan had laughed, but he left it in the ground. Inside the house, in a gray filing cabinet under property tax folders and appliance manuals, his father had also kept an old subdivision plat, a recorded deed, and a survey map folded along yellowing creases. Ethan had not opened that drawer in years. His pickup was a 6-year-old half-ton truck with a locking aluminum toolbox behind the cab. He used it to haul feed, fence posts, lumber, bags of concrete, and the small utility trailer that carried his mower when he helped friends. It was titled and registered in his own name. There was no business logo on the doors, no company number, no commercial plate, and no advertising. The toolbox made it look more work-ready than the polished SUVs common in Cedar Ridge, but that had never been a problem. Ethan parked it in front of his garage or along the wide gravel shoulder inside his driveway, always leaving the travel lane clear. Then Karen Whitmore became HOA president. Karen did not arrive with sirens or threats. She arrived with policy. In her first 6 months, Cedar Ridge residents received new reminders about trash bins, basketball hoops, lawn edging, holiday decorations, guest parking, and the color temperature of exterior lights. Most of the rules already existed somewhere in the covenants, but Karen enforced them with a precision previous boards had never attempted. At meetings, she spoke in a measured tone about consistency, standards, and protecting property values. She rarely called anyone irresponsible. She simply issued notices that made people feel irresponsible for failing to match her interpretation of the rules. The towing contract appeared in a March board packet. Karen had proposed hiring Lakeside Recovery, a local company that handled apartment complexes, shopping centers, and several private communities. Her stated goal was to eliminate recurring parking hazards and unauthorized commercial vehicle storage. The board approved a 6-month contract after a short discussion. 2 days later, every Cedar Ridge household received an email warning that prohibited vehicles, trailers, and vehicles parked in restricted areas could be removed without further notice after documented violations. Ethan read the email because it landed in his inbox, then forgot about it. He did not live on HOA common property, did not park in the subdivision's marked guest spaces, and had never signed a Cedar Ridge membership agreement. His parcel touched the neighborhood, but its legal description predated it. He assumed the notice had nothing to do with him. Karen disagreed. The first violation letter arrived in a white envelope with the Cedar Ridge logo in the upper left corner. Ethan opened it over his kitchen counter and read the bold line twice. Commercial vehicle prohibited from residential streets. Below it was a photograph of his pickup taken from across the road. The image showed the silver truck, the toolbox, and part of his mailbox. A second page cited Section 8.4 of the Cedar Ridge parking rules and gave him 72 hours to remove the vehicle or face a fine. Ethan pulled the HOA covenants from the Public County Records website and read the provision. Section 8.4 did prohibit vehicles primarily used for commercial operations, oversized fleet vehicles, and certain work trucks from remaining on HOA streets and common areas overnight. It also gave the association authority to enforce restrictions on property under its control. What it did not say was that every pickup with a toolbox became a commercial vehicle. More important, nothing in the provision described Ethan's driveway as association property. He wrote Karen a short email. Please identify the specific provision that classifies my privately registered pickup as a commercial vehicle. Please identify the parcel on which you believe the truck is parked. Please provide the recorded document that gives Cedar Ridge HOA towing authority over my driveway. He expected a reply from the property manager. Instead, 2 days later, another envelope appeared in his mailbox. This one included a $150 fine and a warning that continued noncompliance could result in towing. Ethan read it standing beside the mailbox, then looked at the survey pin in the grass. He sent the same 3 questions again. Karen answered with one sentence. The board has confirmed that all road frontage maintained by Cedar Ridge is subject to community parking standards. Ethan noticed what she had not said. She had not said the HOA owned the land. She had not named a parcel. She had not explained how maintenance became towing authority. She had simply replaced 3 questions with a statement of control. That was the first time Ethan sensed the dispute might be about more than a truck. He pulled the pickup closer to his garage, well inside the line his father had always treated as the driveway boundary. For a week, nothing happened. He went to work, repaired a sagging gate on the back fence, and used the truck to bring home 6 bags of gravel. On Sunday evening, he washed mud from the wheel wells and parked it facing the house. The following morning, he found a 3rd notice taped to his mailbox. Final enforcement warning. The fine had increased again. He photographed the notice in place before removing it. That small habit, document first, argue later, would become the difference between a neighborhood disagreement and a record no one could easily rewrite. The Tuesday tow began with the sound of a diesel engine idling outside Ethan's bedroom window. He glanced at the clock, pulled on jeans, and stepped through the front door. A white and blue lakeside recovery truck sat nose down at the edge of his driveway. Its wheel lift was already under the front tires of his pickup. The operator, a broad-shouldered man in a reflective jacket, was tightening the straps. Karen stood a few feet away with board member Paul Danner, both holding coffee cups. Karen had a clipboard tucked beneath her arm. Ethan stopped on the porch long enough to unlock his phone and start recording. "Morning," he said as he walked closer. "Can you show me the property authorization?" The tow operator looked toward Karen. "We've got a private property tow order from the association." Karen pulled a form from the clipboard. "You have been notified 3 times. Your commercial vehicle is in continuing violation." Ethan kept the camera pointed low enough to capture the truck, the tow vehicle, and the form in the same frame. "Does that document say the HOA owns this driveway?" Karen's mouth tightened. "The HOA controls this entire road frontage. We maintain it. We enforce it. You were warned. That wasn't my question. It is the answer." Paul shifted his weight but said nothing. Ethan looked down at the left rear tire of the tow truck. It sat just inside the grass line. Beyond it, barely visible near the ditch, was the old survey pin. The pickup itself was farther in. Every part of the operation was taking place on land his father had always called theirs. The operator paused. "Sir, if you want to contest the tow, you can do that through the office. I've got a signed authorization." Ethan could have moved in front of the truck. He could have argued. He could have called the sheriff and turned the driveway into a spectacle before anyone knew exactly which document governed what. Instead, he stepped back. "Can I get your name and unit number for the video?" The operator gave both. "And who requested the tow?" Karen answered immediately. "I did, as president of Cedar Ridge." Ethan angled the phone toward her. "On behalf of the HOA? Yes. At this location? Yes, Ethan. We are not doing this all morning." "Understood." The pickup rolled away 7 minutes later. Karen watched it go with the expression of someone who believed a matter had finally been resolved. Ethan watched the tow truck disappear around the bend, then turned his camera toward the driveway. He recorded the tire marks, the edge of the gravel, the mailbox, the drainage ditch, and the survey pin. He walked a slow line from the garage to the road and narrated the date and time. Then he went inside, opened the gray filing cabinet, and pulled out the folder his father had labeled West Access Plat. The deed inside was older than Karen's entire subdivision. Ethan did not drive straight to the HOA office. He borrowed his neighbor's sedan and went first to Lakeside Recovery. because the fastest way to lose an argument was to begin it before collecting the paper trail. The tow yard sat behind a chain-link fence beside an auto auction lot, a row of impounded cars angled under bright security lights. Inside the office, a woman behind a glass window found his plate number and printed the tow ticket. The paperwork listed the reason as HOA commercial vehicle violation. It included the time of removal, the driver's name, 6 photographs, the impound fee, and a line marked Propi Ogre Offars Agenti. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association was typed there. Beneath it was a parcel number. Ethan recognized immediately that something was wrong. The first digits matched the subdivision block, not the narrow strip shown on his father's old plat. "Can I see the location photo?" he asked. The clerk turned her monitor. One photograph showed his pickup from the road. Another showed Karen standing beside it. A third captured the tow truck positioned over the gravel edge of his driveway. "What parcel did your driver use for the property authorization?" "That's what the association provided. Can you print the authorization too?" She hesitated, then called for a manager. A man named Daniel Ruiz came from the back office carrying a tablet. He looked at Ethan's deed, then at the tow packet. "Our customer represented that they controlled the property," he said. "That is what this certification means." "I understand. I'm asking which property." Daniel zoomed in on the attached map. A thick blue outline covered nearly every paved road in Cedar Ridge, including the section in front of Ethan's house. "This is the map we were given." Ethan unfolded the old plat on the counter. The paper was soft at the creases. "And this is the recorded subdivision map from the county." Daniel's expression changed slightly. He took the parcel number from the tow ticket and entered it into the county GIS system. The screen loaded an aerial image with colored boundaries. He clicked once, then again. The parcel highlighted on the tow ticket was a common landscape tract almost 400 feet away. "That's not where my truck was," Ethan said. "No," Daniel replied. He searched the road strip. The GIS layer displayed a different number and a different owner name. Walker Ethan J., successor in interest. Daniel stared at the monitor long enough that the office noise seemed to recede. "Wait," he said. "Who actually owns this road?" Ethan slid the deed across the counter. "I do." Daniel did not immediately apologize, and Ethan respected that. A professional answer was more useful than a dramatic one. The manager said an online GIS map was not enough to determine every legal right. Easements, maintenance agreements, covenants, and management contracts could affect authority. But the mismatch was serious enough that he placed the tow charge in disputed status and instructed the clerk not to alter or delete the digital file. "I'm freezing this record until compliance reviews it," Daniel said. "You can retrieve personal property from the truck today. As for release, I need to verify what authority we were given. I'd like copies of everything as it exists right now." Daniel nodded. "With timestamps?" "Yes." That question earned Ethan the first small sign of respect from him. 20 minutes later, Ethan left with a packet containing the tow ticket, authorization form, dispatch entry, photographs, fee sheet, and a copy of the map Karen had provided. He had not recovered the pickup yet. He had not proved that Cedar Ridge possessed no authority. But one thing had changed. Karen could no longer reduce the situation to her version against his. Lakeside's own records fixed the location, the time, the requesting party, and the property representation in place. By noon, Ethan was at the county recorder's office. He did not rely on the faded documents from his filing cabinet. He ordered certified copies of the current deed, the subdivision plat, the access easement recorded when Cedar Ridge was developed, and the later road maintenance agreement. A clerk helped him locate the original survey reference. The description was dense, built from bearings, distances, monument references to corners that meant little until a map was placed beside them. But the basic structure was clear. When the developer bought the eastern tract years earlier, Ethan's father had retained title to a narrow strip that formed part of the existing access road. The developer received a non-exclusive easement allowing Cedar Ridge owners, guests, service vehicles, and emergency traffic to pass over that strip. A later agreement required the association to contribute to maintenance because its residents used the road heavily. The document granted access. It granted cost sharing. It did not convey title. It did not assign exclusive possession. It did not contain language giving Cedar Ridge the right to regulate Ethan's vehicles, issue parking citations on his parcel, or remove personal property from it. Ethan read the easement twice, then asked the clerk whether any later instrument had transferred the strip to the HOA. She searched the grantor-grantee index under his father's name, the developer's name, Cedar Ridge, and the parcel number. Nothing appeared. He next called a licensed surveyor named Marissa Cole, whose firm had worked in the county for 20 years. She could not inspect the property that afternoon. but she reviewed the certified plat and historical survey electronically. Her first caution sounded much like Daniel's. Boundaries had to be verified on the ground. Her second statement was more direct. If the monument is still present where this survey says it is, the road edge near your driveway is inside your parcel. The easement gives them a right to travel over it. That is not the same thing as owning it. What about maintaining the pavement? Maintenance responsibility is not title. What about towing authority? That depends on state law and any valid agreement, but I don't see language here transferring control of your personal parking area to the association. 2 days later, Marissa came to the property with a total station, a metal detector, flagging tape, and copies of the recorded survey. Ethan watched her locate one monument near the ditch, then another farther south under a layer of soil. The rusted pin he had ignored for years was exactly where the old drawing predicted. Marissa set temporary stakes and ran the line. The mark passed outside the travel lane, but well beyond where Ethan's pickup had been parked. The tow truck's tire impressions in Ethan's photographs were inside the line too. She prepared a boundary sketch showing the pickup location based on Ethan's video and Lakeside's time-stamped photographs. It was not a courtroom verdict. It did not settle every possible legal issue. But it transformed the dispute from a claim about road frontage into a measurable location tied to a recorded parcel. Ethan sent Karen a concise email attaching the certified deed, easement, and surveyor's preliminary sketch. Please identify the recorded instrument granting Cedar Ridge HOA the authority to tow a privately registered vehicle from parcel 17442B. Her response arrived 3 hours later. Cedar Ridge has maintained and exercised operational control over this roadway for many years. Your continued refusal to comply with community standards does not exempt your property from reasonable enforcement affecting neighborhood safety and appearance. Again, she answered a question Ethan had not asked. This time he did not reply. He waited for the monthly board meeting. The Cedar Ridge clubhouse was built to look like a small lodge with stones, a gas fireplace, and a meeting room that usually drew fewer than a dozen residents. That Thursday, 27 people attended. News of Ethan's tow had moved through the neighborhood faster than any board email. Some residents thought he was stubborn. Others thought Karen had gone too far. Most did not understand the boundary issue but wanted to hear it explained. Karen opened the meeting with routine business and saved parking enforcement clarification till near the end. When Ethan's name was called, he carried a thin binder to the front table. He did not give a speech. Does Cedar Ridge HOA hold title to parcel 17442B? He asked. Karen looked toward the property manager. The association has long-standing control over the roadway system. That is not my question. Does the HOA hold title? Our legal position is that the association's maintenance obligations and governing documents establish enforcement authority. Ethan turned one page. Does the easement transfer ownership of parcel 17442B to the HOA? The association attorney, Martin Hale, leaned toward his microphone. An easement can carry rights necessary to effectuate its purpose. The precise extent of those rights is a legal question. Agreed, Ethan said. Can you show me a recorded instrument that authorizes the HOA to tow my vehicle from the portion of my parcel outside the traveled lane? Martin looked at Karen. Karen looked at the property manager. No one produced one. Karen shifted the argument. The larger issue is that Mr. Walker has chosen to store a commercial-type vehicle in a manner inconsistent with Cedar Ridge standards. Ethan opened another tab in his binder. The truck is privately registered. The cited rule applies to vehicles on HOA streets and common property. My question is still about authority at the location where the tow occurred. Paul Danner, the board member who had stood beside Karen that morning, lowered his eyes to the agenda. Another director, Sheila Ross, asked Martin whether the board had ever obtained a title opinion on the western road strip. Martin answered carefully, "Not that I have seen." The room changed. It was subtle, but Ethan felt it. The issue was no longer one resident resisting a parking rule. A board member had just asked whether the board had verified ownership before enforcing on the property, and the answer was no. Karen tried to close the discussion. We are not going to relitigate every historic property boundary in a monthly meeting. Ethan nodded. That is fine. Please make sure the minutes reflect that the tow was ordered without a deed or recorded instrument being produced tonight to establish HOA control of the parcel. Karen stared at him. Please make sure that is reflected in the minutes, he repeated. He sat down. No applause followed. Ethan would have distrusted it if it had. What mattered was that the meeting secretary typed while he spoke, and 3 board members had copies of the documents in front of them. The following morning, Daniel Ruiz called from Lakeside Recovery. I finished reviewing the contract package, he said. You should come by. Ethan found him in a small conference room behind the tow office. The manager had printed the Cedar Ridge agreement and spread it beside the map Karen had supplied. One paragraph was highlighted in yellow. By signing each tow authorization, the association certified that it owned, leased, managed, or otherwise possessed lawful towing authority over the listed property. The wording matters to us, Daniel said. We do not independently title search every apartment lot or private road before a tow. The property customer represents that it has authority. If that representation is wrong, we have a problem. He tapped the map. This map includes your road strip. The county deed information does not support the idea that Cedar Ridge owns it. Your easement does not obviously give them the kind of parking control they represented to us. Our compliance consultant wants all disputed boundary locations placed on hold. What does that mean for my truck? We are releasing it. No storage charge. The tow fee stays suspended while we investigate. Ethan did not smile until he saw the pickup roll through the gate. Then Daniel added, "There is something else." He turned his monitor toward Ethan. A filtered dispatch screen displayed a list of Cedar Ridge tows from the previous 9 months. Daniel had highlighted addresses near the western and southern edges of the development. You are not the first tow from a location that may fall outside the clean property boundaries on this map. How many? I am not saying they were all improper. Some may have been in travel lanes or on property clearly controlled by the association. But there are enough that I'm not comfortable assuming this was isolated. The list included a plumber's van, 2 pickups, a landscaping trailer, a contractor's utility truck, a college student's car, and a visitor's SUV. Ethan recognized several names. One belonged to 73-year-old Margaret Ellis, who lived 2 streets over and had once apologized at a board meeting for leaving her late husband's pickup outside overnight. Daniel would not release private customer files to Ethan, and Ethan did not ask him to. Instead, the manager said Lakeside would preserve its records and review the location authority for each questionable tow. If residents wanted their own records, they could request them through the normal process. That afternoon, Ethan called Margaret. She remembered the tow clearly. Her grandson had borrowed the pickup to help her move patio furniture. He parked near the side of her lot, where an old service lane met the subdivision road. Karen photographed it after dark. By morning, it was gone. Margaret had paid $480 in towing and storage because, as she put it, I figured fighting them would cost more than paying them. Do you still have the notice? Ethan asked. Margaret laughed without humor. Honey, at my age I keep everything people tell me I owe. Her notice used the same phrase as Ethan's. Commercial vehicle prohibited. The authorization page she later obtained from Lakeside carried Karen's signature and the same blue-shaded property map. Another resident, Luis Herrera, produced a towing notice for a contractor van that had been parked while he renovated his kitchen. A third resident kept photographs showing his daughter's car near a strip of grass at the edge of the community. Not every case matched Ethan's. Some were clearly on streets everyone agreed Cedar Ridge controlled. Others were ambiguous. Ethan resisted the temptation to call all of them illegal. Accuracy mattered more than outrage. What mattered was the common document. Same map, same certification language, same signature, same assumption that the HOA could treat every shaded roadway as if title and authority were identical. Then Sheila Ross, the board director who had asked about the title opinion, sent Ethan a public portion of the latest financial packet. One line item caught his attention: enforcement administrative reimbursement. The towing company paid Cedar Ridge a small monthly amount tied to administrative coordination, signage, and property access services. The contract did not call it a commission. The amount was not large enough by itself to prove anyone had profited personally, but Ethan understood why it deserved scrutiny. A system designed to discourage parking violations had created a financial stream that grew when enforcement activity increased. He wrote one sentence in his notes: "Does the structure create an incentive to tow more vehicles?" He did not write, "Karen is taking kickbacks." He had no evidence of that, and he refused to weaken a strong case with a claim he could not prove. That restraint became increasingly important, because Karen was no longer treating the dispute as a misunderstanding. 3 days after Lakeside released Ethan's pickup, Cedar Ridge announced a special board meeting to clarify roadway enforcement authority. The proposed resolution was 4 pages long. It declared that all roads maintained by the association were subject to HOA traffic, parking, and aesthetic controls, whether or not fee title was held by Cedar Ridge. It authorized new signage and directed management to treat roadside shoulders and access areas as controlled spaces necessary for safe community operations. Karen presented the resolution as housekeeping. This simply memorializes what has been the association's practice for years, she told the board. Ethan sat in the second row with the document open on his lap. Martin Hale, the HOA attorney, was more cautious. He recommended that language concerning privately titled parcels be reviewed against recorded easements before enforcement occurred. Karen pressed for adoption anyway. The board approved a modified version by 3 votes to 2, with Sheila voting no. Within 48 hours, a contractor installed black and white signs at several entrances. Private road. HOA rules, N for CD. One sign appeared 10 feet from Ethan's mailbox. He photographed it before sunrise, then again at noon with the survey stakes visible. He saved the board agenda, the resolution draft, the final resolution, the contractor invoice, and the installation date. The dates told a story no argument could change. His pickup had been towed on April 7. The resolution claiming broader control was adopted on April 18. Whatever authority the board believed it had created or clarified on April 18 could not rewrite the facts of April 7. Karen seemed to understand the public relations problem before she understood the legal one. She sent a community-wide email accusing a small number of owners and adjacent property holders of undermining uniform safety rules and creating confusion that could reduce property values. She did not name Ethan, but everyone knew whom she meant. Several residents posted angry comments in the neighborhood forum. Ethan did not respond. He printed the email and put it in his binder. That evening, Sheila called him. "There is something you should see," she said. She was not offering secrets from a closed legal session. She had located an older set of board minutes and correspondence distributed to directors months before the towing contract was signed. The packet contained an email from a property consultant named Warren Blake, who had reviewed Cedar Ridge's mapping after a drainage complaint. One paragraph was marked with a note from the prior property manager. Several western road edge strips remained privately titled. Warren had written, "They should not be represented as HOA-owned common area without title review. Maintenance participation under the access agreements should not be treated as evidence of fee ownership." Karen had been copied on the email. Ethan read the message 3 times. Until then, he had allowed for the possibility that Karen simply misunderstood an old property arrangement. Cedar Ridge patched the asphalt. Residents used the road. A board president without legal training might honestly assume control followed maintenance. But the email meant the issue had been raised before the tow contract, before Ethan's first violation, and before Karen stood in his driveway saying the HOA controlled everything. The question changed. It was no longer only whether Karen was wrong. It was whether she had been warned that the map required title review and chose to certify it anyway. Sheila sent the full chain to the board attorney and treasurer. The treasurer, Thomas Bell, immediately requested an independent legal review of every property representation attached to the Lakeside contract. Martin advised the board to suspend disputed edge enforcement until that review was complete. Karen opposed the suspension. "We cannot allow one property owner to paralyze community enforcement," she said during a recorded meeting. Thomas answered, "This is not about one property owner anymore. It is about what we certified to a vendor." For the first time, Karen certainty sounded less like control and more like isolation. Lakeside reacted faster than the board. Daniel sent an internal preservation notice covering Cedar Ridge dispatch logs, call recordings, driver photographs, signed tow authorizations, map versions, and billing records. His insurer had instructed him not to delete routine data while the authority question remained open. Ethan learned this only because Daniel told him his own file was being preserved as part of the review. The evidence now formed 3 clean layers. The pickup had been located on Ethan's parcel. No recorded instrument anyone had produced gave the HOA explicit towing authority over that location. Karen had received a written warning months earlier that privately titled road edge strips should not be represented as HOA common property without review. Then Martin Hale called Ethan with an offer. The HOA would rescind every violation against his pickup, reimburse any documented towing-related expense, remove the new sign from his parcel if the survey confirmed its location, and issue a letter stating that his privately registered pickup could remain at his residence. No party would admit wrongdoing. The dispute would be confidential. Ethan would release the association, its directors, and its vendors from claims related to the tow. For a man who had wanted only to park his truck at home, the offer looked like victory. Ethan asked one question. "What happens to everyone else who was towed under the same map?" Martin paused. "This proposal resolves your individual matter." "That was not my question. The board has commissioned a broader review. Will the people affected be notified? I cannot commit the association to terms outside this settlement. Will improper tow fees be refunded? I cannot answer that today. Ethan looked through his kitchen window at the pickup parked near the garage. If this were only about my truck, I would sign, he said. But you already know it might not be. He proposed a narrower release. He would drop any personal claim beyond reimbursement if Cedar Ridge agreed to audit all TOWs authorized with the disputed map, notify vehicle owners whose locations lacked verified authority, correct the map, refund charges where appropriate, and publish a factual clarification separating maintenance rights from ownership. The board declined. Karen called the demands excessive. So Ethan filed a formal complaint with the State Consumer Protection Office that accepted private property towing complaints, attaching his deed, survey sketch, tow authorization, photographs, and correspondence. He also sent a factual notice to Cedar Ridge's insurer. He did not accuse anyone of crimes. He did not demand arrests. He asked 2 agencies and an insurer to examine a simple question: whether vehicles had been removed from land for which the party ordering the tow could not establish lawful authority. That should have been the point where a cautious board stopped everything. Instead, Karen decided that stopping would look like an admission. 5 mornings later, Ethan saw a utility pickup stop near the mailbox. 2 men wearing reflective vests unloaded a post driver, several stakes, and another HOA sign. Behind them, a small striping trailer carried cans of pavement marking paint. Karen arrived in her SUV less than 10 minutes later. Ethan stepped outside with his phone already recording. "What are they doing?" he asked. "Marking the association's enforcement boundary," Karen said. The board resolution was clear. The survey is also clear. That is your surveyor's interpretation. Before Ethan could answer, a familiar white and blue lakeside truck turned onto the road. For 1 second, he thought Karen had ordered his pickup removed again. Then he saw the target: Luis Herrera's contractor van, parked farther down near a grassy turnout used during his kitchen renovation. The driver stopped 30 feet short of it and remained in the cab. His phone rang. He answered, listened, and looked toward Karen. Daniel Ruiz had anticipated another disputed call. Lakeside's system now carried an internal hold on every Cedar Ridge location touching the western boundary. Dispatchers had instructions not to proceed without proof tied to the exact parcel. The driver lowered his window. "Mom, dispatch needs ownership or recorded towing authority for this location before I hook anything." Karen walked toward him with a folder. "You have our contract and the board's resolution." The driver shook his head. "They need the property authority for this exact spot. I am the HOA president. I am authorizing it. That is not what they are asking for." Ethan said nothing. Karen called Lakeside herself. Ethan could hear only her side of the conversation, but the change in her posture told the story. She began with certainty, moved to irritation, then paced away from the road as the dispatcher repeated the requirement. Finally, Karen snapped, "We have maintained this road for years." The answer came loudly enough through her phone that Ethan caught part of it. "Maintenance is not the document we need." The tow truck left without touching the van. It was the cleanest reversal of the entire dispute. 3 weeks earlier, Karen had stood beside a tow truck and answered every question for the driver. Now the same company refused to move a vehicle until she answered the one question she had been avoiding from the beginning. The utility crew continued unloading signs. Ethan called Marissa Cole, who had already scheduled a final field verification that morning because the temporary stakes had been disturbed twice. She arrived 20 minutes later with an assistant and set up her equipment near the ditch. Ethan also requested a civil standby through the county sheriff's non-emergency line, explaining that there was a property boundary dispute and contractors were placing objects near the surveyed line. A deputy arrived, made clear he was not deciding title, and stood back while both sides documented what they were doing. That restraint mattered. No one was arrested. No one was dragged from the road. The dispute did not become legitimate because a uniform appeared. It became harder to distort because multiple people were now recording the same physical facts. Marissa reestablished the monuments and ran the boundary. Her assistant stretched a bright line between flagged points. The new HOA sign Karen's crew had begun to install stood more than 6 feet inside Ethan's parcel. Marissa pointed to the recorded measurements, then to the line on the ground. "This post location is west of the boundary." Karen crossed her arms. "The association has easement rights." "Yes," Marissa said. "Access rights over the described area. I am only telling you where the title boundary is." The deputy asked Karen whether the crew could pause installation until the civil issue was reviewed. She resisted for several minutes, then told the workers to stop. Ethan walked toward the rusty survey pin near the grass. The camera on his phone captured the old piece of metal, Marissa's fresh flag, the proposed sign location, and the road beyond. What had seemed like meaningless background in his first video was now the fixed point tying the entire argument together. That afternoon, the Cedar Ridge board called an emergency meeting. The subject was no longer Ethan's pickup. The agenda read, Vader authority representations, disputed property boundaries, insurance exposure, and temporary enforcement controls. Thomas Bell opened with numbers. Lakeside had identified 19 Cedar Ridge TOWs requiring location review. 7 were clearly on HOA-controlled property and appeared unaffected. 5 involved marked travel lanes where separate rules might apply. 7 others were close enough to privately titled edge parcels that the authorization basis needed verification. The total disputed towing and storage charges were not enormous by corporate standards, but that was not what worried the board. The insurer had asked whether Cedar Ridge knowingly represented privately titled land as association-controlled property after receiving contrary information. Martin Hale had asked the same question. Sheila placed Warren Blake's old email on the screen. Karen objected that the consultant's language was preliminary. He said title review was needed. He did not say we lacked authority. Thomas replied, and did we complete the title review before signing the towing map? Silence. Did we? Karen looked at Martin. Martin answered for the record. I have not located a title review completed before execution of the Lakeside Agreement. Paul Danner, who had been beside Karen during Ethan's tow, finally spoke. I thought the map came from legal. It came from management, Karen said. The property manager shook her head. The base map came from management. The enforcement shading was approved by the board president's office. That sentence ended the last easy escape route. Karen accused the board of turning a routine compliance dispute into a political attack. She said Ethan had manipulated residents, embarrassed vendors, and created risk by refusing to accept uniform standards. But the more she spoke about Ethan, the more the other directors returned to documents. Who approved the shaded map? Who received Warren's warning? Who signed the tow authorizations? Who decided the warning did not require review? Who instructed contractors to place signs after the dispute had already been raised? Ethan attended but did not need to answer any of those questions. The board voted 4-1 to suspend Karen's unilateral enforcement authority while an independent review proceeded. All towing at disputed boundary locations was halted. New signs on privately titled strips were to be removed or covered pending verification. Thomas was authorized to work directly with the insurer and outside counsel. Karen cast the only no vote. The following 2 weeks were quieter than the previous 2 months, but more consequential. Outside counsel reviewed deeds, plats, easements, board minutes, and vendor contracts. Lakeside matched its dispatch photographs to parcel maps. Marissa provided a sealed survey of Ethan's boundary. The property manager compiled every version of the enforcement map stored in Cedar Ridge's records. A pattern emerged that was serious but less sensational than neighborhood gossip had suggested. Cedar Ridge did legitimately own or control most roads within the development. Many towing actions were properly authorized. The problem concentrated at several older boundary strips created before the subdivision existed. Those strips had access or maintenance agreements, but the documents varied. Karen's simplified enforcement map erased those differences and presented the entire network as one continuous area under HOA control. 7 tow files received heightened review. 3 involved locations that outside counsel concluded Cedar Ridge could not establish as association-controlled property at the time of removal. 2 were resolved in favor of the HOA because the vehicles had been within areas covered by broader recorded rights. 2 remained ambiguous enough that the board agreed refunds were safer and fairer than continued dispute. Margaret Ellis was one of the residents who received a letter. She called Ethan after opening it. "They are sending my money back," she said. "How much?" "Every dollar. TOW, storage, administrative fee." She became quiet for a moment. "I never thought anyone would look at it again." That mattered more to Ethan than any apology Karen could have offered him. Lakeside revised its Cedar Ridge procedures. Future private property tow requests had to identify the exact location, the requesting party's basis of authority, and the parcel or controlled area involved. Any address flagged as disputed required supervisor approval. Daniel told Ethan the company had expanded the same safeguard to several other communities with mixed public, private, and easement roads. "We relied too heavily on a colored map," he admitted. "That is on us too." Cedar Ridge's insurer funded resolution of the valid civil claims and required governance changes as a condition of continued coverage. The HOA updated its property maps. Edge parcels were separated from association-owned common areas. Board resolutions could no longer be treated as substitutes for recorded property rights when a title question existed. The financial review also clarified the administrative reimbursement that had concerned Ethan. It was not a personal payment to Karen. It was a contract credit to Cedar Ridge for signage and coordination. That finding disappointed residents who preferred a dramatic corruption story, but Ethan considered it important. Then say exactly that, he told Thomas. If it was not a kickback, do not call it one. Accuracy had brought them this far. He was not going to abandon it at the finish line simply because exaggeration would make Karen look worse. The independent review was less forgiving on another point. It found that Karen had received Warren Blake's warning before approving the simplified enforcement map. The review did not claim she had committed a crime. It concluded that she had failed to obtain the recommended title clarification, had continued to represent disputed areas as controlled property, and had escalated enforcement after the boundary problem was specifically raised. That conduct exposed the association and its vendor to avoidable liability. At the next regular election, Karen did not have enough support to remain president. Before ballots were counted, she resigned the office but kept her seat temporarily as a director. A month later, she resigned from the board entirely. There was no dramatic escort from the clubhouse. No handcuffs. No convoy. She carried a folder to her car after a 2-hour meeting and drove away while residents stood in small groups beneath the parking lot lights. For Ethan, that ending felt more credible than spectacle. The real change was written into procedure. Cedar Ridge published a clarification explaining that road maintenance did not itself establish fee ownership. It acknowledged that certain access easements crossed privately titled land and that enforcement on those areas required authority consistent with the recorded documents. The association created a boundary review process for future disputes and prohibited towing from any location with an unresolved title question until council or recorded instruments established the basis for action. The board also sent notices to every vehicle owner included in the audit. Some were told their tow had been properly authorized. Others received refunds. No one was promised that every citation they disliked would disappear. The point was narrower and stronger. The HOA had to prove its authority before exercising it. Months later, on a clear Saturday morning, Ethan washed the silver pickup in the same driveway where it had been taken. The aluminum toolbox still sat behind the cab. The same old mailbox leaned slightly toward the road. Cedar Ridge residents still drove over the access strip on their way to work, school, and grocery stores. Ethan had never blocked them. He had never threatened to close the road, charge tolls, or punish neighbors for using the easement their deeds gave them. Near the grass, Marissa's survey cap now marked the old boundary more clearly. Ethan crouched beside the rusted pin his father had told him not to disturb. For decades, it had been nothing more than a small piece of metal most people would have stepped over without noticing. Yet it had survived new asphalt, a subdivision, changing boards, and an argument built largely on the assumption that whatever looked like part of the neighborhood must belong to the neighborhood. Ethan installed one modest sign several feet inside his property. It did not threaten anyone. It did not mention Karen. It read, "Private parcel. Access easement cars continued to pass." That was the point. Ethan had never objected to the right of passage. His father had granted it, the deeds preserved it, and the neighborhood depended on it. What he objected to was the quiet transformation of a right to pass over land into a claim to control everything on it. The distinction sounded technical until a tow truck appeared in the driveway. Then it became personal. The last paperwork did not arrive all at once. It came in ordinary envelopes over the next several weeks, each one closing a loop that had begun with a different document. Lakeside sent Ethan a final zero balance statement showing the disputed tow fee removed from his account. Cedar Ridge mailed a formal rescission of all commercial vehicle violations connected to the pickup. The insurer confirmed reimbursement for the cost of the survey portion directly tied to the dispute. Outside counsel attached a corrected map showing the western access strip in a different pattern from association-owned property. Ethan laid the documents across his kitchen table in chronological order. The first violation notice looked almost harmless beside them. One page, one photograph, one confident sentence. That was how the whole thing had started, not with a dramatic threat, but with a piece of paper that assumed authority before proving it. Sheila Ross stopped by that afternoon with a copy of the new board policy. She had been elected president after Karen's resignation, although she seemed almost embarrassed by the title. "I want you to read this before we publish it," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I am not your lawyer. No. You are the reason we finally learned to ask the lawyer before we paint a map blue." He read it anyway. The policy required staff to separate deed ownership, easement rights, maintenance obligations, and rule enforcement authority into different fields in the association's property records. No future vendor could receive a map labeled simply HOA property unless every shaded area had been verified. If a parcel was subject only to an easement, the map had to say what kind. If the recorded documents were unclear, enforcement stopped until they were reviewed. Ethan handed the paper back. That would have prevented the tow. That is the idea. Sheila looked toward the window at the pickup. Some people are angry that the rules are more complicated now. They were always complicated, Ethan said. The map just hit it. That sentence found its way into a later board discussion, and eventually into the way residents talked about the entire episode. Cedar Ridge had not suddenly become a lawless neighborhood where nobody could enforce anything. Most of its parking rules remained. Residents still received notices for blocked fire lanes, abandoned vehicles, and violations on association property. Lakeside still towed when the required authority was clear. What disappeared was the shortcut. Karen's old system had treated confidence as verification. The new one required someone to stop and check. Margaret used part of her refund to replace the battery in her late husband's pickup. On a Sunday afternoon, Ethan saw her grandson driving it slowly through the neighborhood with Margaret in the passenger seat. She waved both hands through the open window as if the truck itself had won a court case. Luis Herrera finished his kitchen renovation and returned the contractor van without another towing notice. He later joked that his most expensive cabinet had been the one that caused him to learn the difference between an easement and fee title. Even Daniel Ruiz kept the first disputed map pinned to a corkboard in Lakeside's compliance office. Across it, he had written in black marker, "Veritied the exact property." There was one final encounter Ethan did not expect. In late summer, he stopped at a hardware store 20 miles from Cedar Ridge for fence staples and a new gate hinge. Karen was standing near the garden section with a cart full of potting soil. For a moment, they both considered pretending not to see each other. Karen spoke first. "You got what you wanted." Ethan looked at her. "My truck back? The board? The audit? The policy changes? Me gone. I wanted you to answer 3 questions. Her face tightened at the memory. "You made it bigger than it needed to be." "No," Ethan said. "Every time the answer was missing, you made the authority bigger." Karen looked away toward the checkout lanes. "You think paperwork makes you right about everything." "No. Paperwork tells me what can be proved." For the first time since the dispute began, she had no board table, no violation folder, and no contractor waiting for instructions. She was simply another person standing beneath fluorescent lights with a shopping cart. Ethan did not need an apology from her. He did not ask for one. He picked up his box of fence staples and walked away. Back home, he replaced the hinge on the west gate before sunset. The work took less than an hour. When he finished, he leaned against the pickup and watched headlights move along the access road. Every vehicle crossed part of his parcel for a few seconds, exactly as the easement intended. None of that bothered him. Ownership, he had learned from his father, was not the same as domination. Sometimes owning land meant accepting obligations written into it long before an argument began. Cedar Ridge residents possessed a legal right to travel over that strip. Ethan respected that right because it was recorded, specific, and real. Karen's mistake had been the opposite. She had taken one real right, the association's role in maintaining a road used by its members, and stretched it until it covered rights the documents never gave her. That was why the final lesson of Cedar Ridge had almost nothing to do with pickup trucks. Institutions rarely announce that they are crossing a line. More often, the line disappears beneath routine language. Policy, standards, maintenance, administrative authority, community interest. Each phrase can sound reasonable. Each may describe a legitimate responsibility. But responsibility in one area does not automatically create ownership in another, and repetition does not turn an assumption into a recorded right. A logo cannot do that. A board vote cannot do that by itself. A towing contract cannot do that simply because someone signed it. The entire dispute changed because Ethan kept asking for the document underneath the claim. Which rule? Which parcel? Which recorded authority? Each answer closed one question and opened a larger one until the story no longer depended on who sounded more certain in a driveway. It depended on what could be shown. On the first quiet morning after the final letter arrived, Ethan carried his coffee to the porch and sat where he had stood when the tow truck came. The road looked unchanged. The pavement still curved past the mailbox. The subdivision entrance still caught the early sun. A delivery van crossed the easement, followed by a school bus and 2 neighbors heading to work. Nothing about the scene suggested how much paper had been required to explain it. Ethan thought about the tow authorization with Karen's signature, the wrong parcel number, the blue-shaded map, the old warning email, the survey line, and the board minutes that recorded every attempt to replace a missing answer with a broader claim. None of those items had seemed decisive alone. Together they had done what anger could not. They had fixed the sequence of events so precisely that each new explanation had to confront the one before it. That was the real reversal. Karen had believed authority flowed from the position she held. Ethan had treated authority as something that had to be traced to its source. Once the documents were placed in order, the title of HOA president could not change a deed, and years of road maintenance could not silently rewrite an easement. He finished his coffee, walked down the driveway, and brushed grass away from the old survey marker. His father had been right to leave it alone. The little piece of steel had never argued with anyone. It had simply stayed where the record said it belonged. A few minutes later, Ethan started the pickup and backed toward the road. He stopped before entering the travel lane, looked once at the modest private parcel, access easement sign, and smiled. The road still served everyone who had the right to use it. Cedar Ridge still had rules. Lakeside still had tow trucks. Boards still held meetings. Nothing needed to be destroyed for the system to improve. It only needed one person to ask the question everyone else had skipped. Who actually owns the road? And once that answer was placed on the table, every threat, fine, resolution, and declaration had to stand beside it. The loudest voice in Cedar Ridge did not decide the boundary. The recorded truth did, where it had been.